Hello everyone. We have a game with the white pieces against Alberta 69, rated 1083. We go d4, putting a pawn in the center, developing our bishop. He does the same thing. We now bring a knight towards the center, threatening to play e4. This guy plays knight to c6, which in a way stops us. If we play e4 and he takes and we take, we're now hanging our own d-pawn. So it's a funny way to stop it. So we're just going to go down the Jobava London route, develop the bishop towards the center, and black goes e6. This does not stop us from going knight b5, attacking the pawn. The only way to defend c7 would be to put your bishop here, which I guess we take. He has to take with the c-pawn. I like that. I do like that. So let's go for it. I know we're not developing, but we're doing a targeted strike on a specific weakness because we get free stuff out of it. What free stuff? We get his dark square bishop. So let's take it. We also disconnect his pawns. This does strengthen the center in the form of the e5 square, but it also kind of makes a target and a weakness in the long run too. So give and take. Okay, what do we want to do? We should probably develop. Is there anything we could really do about this? Like, let's say we bring our knight out and he plays it. We take. He takes. That stops it for one turn anyway. But we want to develop, so we want to play this move either way. Controlling these dark squares. And in the long term, we're going to try to argue that our dark square bishop is going to be really good. Well, we don't have to because he just immediately threw the game. I was kind of looking forward to seeing how this played out, but after g5, attacking our bishop, the pawn is hanging for free because this bishop attacks the queen, so we get the turn back. So that's kind of the whole game. Now he plays f6, which takes away the square from the knight and opens a diagonal towards his king, which we can't use right this second. So since he's hitting our bishop, let's bring it back and maintain the pin on the pawn so that it controls e5 square by pinning the pawn. And it doesn't walk into any e5 pawn pushes when it's on h4. So he moves the queen, so the pawn is no longer pinned, but now the knight is tied down to the defense of the pawn. Currently he gives a check on this diagonal. We get to play a very natural move, c3. You could potentially trade the queens, you are up material. But I want to just solidify my pawn chain and say, why is your queen there? And maybe I can use my queen on the light squares for some type of offensive action. So he breaks in the center, which makes sense. Temporarily weakens these squares, that's fine. He's threatening maybe to push, although his structure's kind of messed up. If we take, he can take with the f pawn. I think I'm going to let him push. I don't think it's good for him. It creates so many holes and weaknesses. So what do I want to do then? I think I just want to put my pawns on dark, creating a dark chain. He's going to push. I'm going to drop my knight here. Yeah, and that all looks good. My queen has access to his king. I could break down his pawn structure at any time or play around it. Do I have anything else? I mean, I like this. I'm developing my bishop, supporting my center, opening my queen. And when he plays this, his center loses all dynamic options. It becomes more fixed. He does have this option, I guess, but it's never really going to work. So he does do this. I don't see a different square for my knight. I could go home, because if I go here, I mean, it's fine if I'm going to break down his pawn chain, then it supports that. Otherwise, if I want to play around the pawn chain, I could put it on this square, which is an outpost, f4. I kind of like playing around the pawn chain because it's just permanent weaknesses. You can do whatever you want. I'm actually going to bring it home, as ridiculous as this might look to you. I don't want to break down his pawn chain, although it's an option, because I think his pawn structure is bad. So I'm just going to leave it. I feel like if I get rid of this stuff, it'll help his coordination, his harmony, his mobility. I feel like these are just so ugly. You know, especially if I get a knight on f4, permanent weaknesses. It's like you're giving him no quarter, you're giving him nothing. Scraps, food scraps, that's it. Okay, so he goes h5, which stops the queen coming to h5, so it's a clever move and does make sense in that way. However, we can make a simple developing move, threatening to take the pawn with check, with a lesser value piece, and we get to develop. Always keep in mind you can get to this square with your knight from h3 as well. Oh, but Joey, doesn't he take the knight and ruin your pawn structure? Yes, but he also gives you an open g-file towards his king, and he gave you his bishop, both of his bishops. And 2 bishops against 2 knights, ouch. In that case, in the endgame, when everything does open up, your bishops are going to just destroy. Let me take these arrows out. And so it's such a simple structure, right? Like, what even is this? It's the London structure. And we have our bishop modestly developed. Our knight went back home, and we're just crushing him. You know, it's weird. So he makes his bishop move, supporting the pawn, but walking into a future knight here with tempo. Maybe he's trying to castle that way. I feel like this comes with check, so that's a little weird. So let's take free stuff with check. This alignment's not scary. Oh, I wasn't expecting him to block. Okay, so that's why he put his bishop here, so he doesn't have to move his king, I guess. But if you're just going to trade down 2 pawns, that's not going to be good for you. I mean, I guess you can't move because your other bishop's hanging. So let's take this. Let's oblige him. Now our bishop's hanging, so let's move it with a threat, protected by pawns. Now we have a passed h pawn as a win condition, so we can trade everything into a winning endgame. And we have no weaknesses, and he can't do anything with his piece. This is no longer ever a thing because we're going to put our knight there, and he's going to slowly lose the game. It's already over, it's just a matter of time. We could even just push these pawns and gain more space and force all of his stuff back if we wanted. But let's bring the knight into the game. Let's get it here first. It'll put permanent pressure on his position in a really annoying way. And so if this d pawn was on c6 and he had a pawn chain, right, like this, then I would have chosen a different plan earlier with my knight to try to break it down with one of these moves and attack it. because it's a good looking pawn chain, but because it's not so good looking, I'm going to leave him with all the weaknesses and utilize this square. So he brings the queen back voluntarily, which I guess tries to defend a number of weaknesses. We're just going to improve the knight with a threat. He can't defend that easily, and we can attack it. As a matter of fact, even last move we had this double threat. So he moves his king to protect this square, but it doesn't defend the pawn. But I'm still not going to take the pawn. You could even move your queen here. Really attacking the light squares. He knows what's coming. You have really good moves. His light squares are toast. H pawn, just GG's. I'm surprised he had the, wherewithal to know that the position was completely lost. A lot of people would just play on, they don't really have an idea. Pretty good. So we start with d4, knight f3, threatening to play e4. That's why we like this move order. He kind of stops us, so we go down the regular line with bishop f4. And now, normally you play e3, and the reason you do that before knight b5 is so that your bishop protects your knight when he does stuff like queen a5 check. But he didn't move his c pawn, he can't move his queen out, so this early knight b5 isn't bad for you. It's not something scary. So we throw it in because he has to respond to it with his bishop. So it gives us the bishop pair on move 5. Can't really argue with that. A lot of times in the Jobava London, you end up playing with just 2 knights as minor pieces. And so I'm more than happy to have a bishop on the board, I just develop towards the center, and he immediately blunders. It goes from a completely even position to +2 because he hangs his whole position. The engine wants him to play f6, which is prophylaxis against both of my pieces, and supports e5 because he has a nice... The downside of my move earlier was, I said, it creates a stronger center for him, which he can try to roll forward. I mean, white can... he has his own ways of fighting, plus he has the bishop. So that's why I went down this line. But still, that's what you should do as black, because that's your way of playing the position now. But anyway, he throws, and we take free stuff. Force move. Force move. Why give him the queen when we can attack with it? Now, what's the best move here? It is e3. You see that? I mean, it keeps changing its mind, so it has like 2 moves that are equal, or 3 moves, 5 moves. Okay, so you have a lot of moves apparently. I was looking at e4. It's interesting because I didn't really want to calculate it, so I glossed over it. After he takes, the move you want to see is just knight back. But then when he defends it, yeah, this is way too much. I'm not calculating any of this right now. And it's the same eval as d takes e, which I figured maybe he can just recapture either way. And then you just play a normal game, and it's still +2. So he has this pawn mass, but because his king is so exposed, your bishop's on a nice diagonal, good piece development. You have a very passive pawn presence, but your pieces are good, and his king is not good, and that gives you +2, which is really nice. And because these pawns don't have side pawns, they can never really push with great effect, because there's only 3 and they're doubled, and so they're not as threatening as they might seem. But we didn't do any of that. We went e3. It avoids all of the complications, it avoids all of the calculations, and there's literally nothing to calculate from here other than push and knight goes somewhere. But we already knew that, like that's not something you need to calculate. Okay, so it doesn't hate knight back. it's still +2. It says go here as a top, which makes sense, of course, but I still like my move, +2.1. Then free development, because it hits the pawn. Free stuff. Forcing move, because we don't want to lose our bishop. Forced move, because it's hanging. Develop towards the center, +3.2. Develop for free, +4.4. And you see, I was thinking here, oh look, we have moves like bring our queen in here, because it just looked kind of deadly. But then he resigned. It's funny they don't list queen b3. I mean, it can't be bad. Yeah, +3.3. You go in here and you're threatening the light squares. He has to try to defend, but you're also coming in this way. Super awkward for him. He's also hanging stuff, so 96% game, all zeros. And aside from the normal stuff you take from my games, something I would add here is do not be afraid to go home. Where's the move? Yeah, when you're here, do not be afraid to go home. The knights often have to do weird stuff to get to the squares they want to get to. So if I want to get to f4, which I do because it's an outpost, you take whatever route you have to take. If you go this way, it takes 4 more moves to get here, so that's not the circuit you want to be on. So if you have to go home, don't be afraid to do it. Obviously, you have to take the concrete position into... You have to take... What am I trying to say? You have to take the concrete position into account. Yeah. So hopefully this helps you play the Jobava London. Hopefully it shows you how you can just take his dark square bishop and create this dark square pawn chain, and it's kind of easy to play. So give it a try. Submit your rapid games in my Discord. Good luck in your chess.